Well, you made it back. I'm glad you tuned in for the second half. Where we left off, I was just starting to put in a horizon line here. I've got a little bit of white into a lot of Van Dyke brown. I want this to stay quite dark because it's going to be in silhouette. I want the impression that the sun is behind and you're getting that really bright light in front. If I want texture on this, now I want to make some sort of a landmass here, whether it's hill or trees. I need something in here to give it some interest and some purpose. So see, if I want a smoother hill, I can literally just do that. If I want texture on it, which would bring it a little closer, I can tap the brush like this and load it this way. So it's really scraggly, and I can kind of crunch the paint on there. I say crunch because as I do this with my brush, I can hear my brush going, and it makes that little crunching noise. But I want to get an interesting flow across here. Just don't put the same repetitive up and down hump so it looks like a roller coaster. I'm going to carve this down a little bit below that sunspot so the sun is peeking up through that notch a little bit. For some reflections, I'll take the same color. And you already know this probably if you've painted it all in this technique. If we pull straight down, it gives us water reflections. Now I'm going to blend these out a little more so momentarily once I get it on here. I'll smooth those out. I'm trying to mimic the design of the land above, so where my hill is taller, obviously the reflection comes a little lower, so it's kind of a mirror image. It's symmetrical in reverse. Now I'll smooth that out and you'll see what a difference it makes. I'm going to just come back and use this 2-inch scenery brush that I was using earlier. I'll just wipe it off. Theoretically, yes, you should clean it. I don't have enough time on screen here to do that all the time, so I'm just going to kind of go for it. But it'll give you the idea. I'm just painting this so you can see how I approach a painting and show you that it doesn't necessarily have to be rocket science. A lot of these techniques are easily learned, and it's just a matter of knowing them and putting them all together. See how that makes that very watery? I'm going to take my large painting knife, which is also in my signature line. I'm going to take out some titanium white. I'll pull that out and I'll get a little sliver on the back of the blade, and especially in this area where the sun is coming down through, that's where it's going to be the most intense, which is actually going to end up being our focal point for the painting. I'm wiping the knife off on a paper towel. It's laying here in between loading it because you will pick up the brown and the yellow and the red and everything else from the canvas, so you'll see me duck out of sight here, and I'm just wiping that blade off. But I'll put a few little shimmers across the water. I've had a tremendous response from YouTube over the past few years, and I thank everybody for tuning in and watching. It's been great exposure, and I appreciate all the kind comments and remarks that I've gotten. I'm glad to know people are benefiting from this and you're using it to your advantage and learning how to paint. Painting is a great hobby or occupation, depending on how far you go with it. Great activity in general. So I'm glad I'm turning people on to it. Okay, well, that'll give you the idea of that. I'm actually going to switch over to my 1.5-inch texture brush. This is a little more coarse than the larger brush that I was using earlier. This one's a little more scraggly, and for the purpose of creating texture, that's why I call it a texture brush. I'm going to take a really good amount of Van Dyke brown, and I'm just going to tap to put some rough indication of some land, a bank here in the foreground. I have a full-length video that's very much like this on my website that's available. It's called Let's Paint a Sunset. So, as well as several other ones. Don't be afraid to check those out. Just want to have some land in here, and maybe I'll put a nice tree or two silhouetted against that. We could do a fir tree or a leaf tree. Let's do just like a couple of lonesome pines. Notice I'm keeping this value very dark. It's in silhouette. If the light's behind, you can afford to go very dark on these, and they require minimal highlighting. I'll put a little bit of highlight on them, but they won't take much. Won't require much. I'm going to use my small knife, which is very similar to my large painting knife. It's just a little smaller. I'm going to take maybe some of this orangey color, something warm, like the sun's hitting. I'll take a little sliver on the side of that blade and on the side facing the sun. I won't bring it all the way around. I'll let that fall into shadow on the back side. And that'll give the trees some shape. They won't appear as quite as flat. They're getting just a little bit of light on the edges, which is a nice effect. It actually pulls them out of the background a little further, so they're not lost in the shuffle. And I have a very long script liner in my brush line, which is exactly what it says it is. It's a long liner, great for doing really long, graceful branches. The key to doing work with this brush is to thin it down. I'm dipping into the paint thinner, getting a lot of thinner. And in my mind, these are kind of scraggly old fir trees. We see these a lot up here in northern New York. You see these old scraggly trees that the branches hang down on. They've lost their needles. Notice that my branches are kind of pointing towards the sun, leading the viewer to my focal area. Very common thing that we artists do to make the viewer look where we want. So obviously if you're painting this on your own, you would have much more time than what I've had here. But I thank you for joining in, and I hope you learned something from this lesson. I hope you give it a try. Check out my website and blog, and maybe I'll see you on Facebook along the way. We'll add a few little grasses here, as long as we got a minute or two. And the same thing with those. Notice I'm going to kind of have those pointing towards the sun. So you can take this as far as you want, but I just wanted to show you. This is a very quick little painting, but it's effective. And I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you give it a shot, and I hope I see you at a class somewhere down the road in the future. You're watching Wilson Bickford. Thanks for tuning in.